Hi everyone! So today's video is actually a bit of a throwback. It is a video from my first book signing. So it's just my presentation where I talk a little bit about the book, answer some questions, talk about my process a bit. So I hope you enjoy. Hit that like button and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.
Yeah.
Alright, so thanks for coming. So I'm just going to get started a little bit talking about the book, about my background and everything. So I started writing when I was a little child, actually, was like short stories and things like that, and then when I was 12 I started writing this book here, Wanderable Shadows. That was like when I started getting more into novel writing, and I continued that throughout college. And a lot of my inspiration comes from the supernatural history, because I always find that fascinating. And I decided to start publishing my novels in 2019 because I got out of a really bad work situation. And I decided to do the 9 to 5 thing wasn't for me. So I had all these novels on my computer, and I'm like, might as well start publishing them, which leads me to what we're here today. So I decided to start writing this on this world. For those of you who haven't read it yet, it is about the Salem witch trials in 1692 that took place in Massachusetts. When I wrote it, I was inspired because I had always been interested in Salem witch trials, even when, before I was 12. I'd been to Salem, I had watched the crucible and all that, so I was inspired to write my own story about it. So when I went to look up different families and things like that, I went on the website. The University of Virginia has an excellent website with all the resources for the Salem witch trials, and they had biographies up there. So I found Mary Parker of Andover, and they don't really get mentioned her family when it comes to the Salem witch trials, so I decided to write about them and tell their story. So this time when I went back to write the novel in the summer of 2019, I did a bunch more research for it. I tried to make it as historically accurate as possible because I just wanted to add respect for the family, to tell their story, and the history is interesting enough on its own. I didn't really need to add anything. So I'll just add a little bit of background on the Parker family. So the family was headed by two patriarchs, Joseph and Nathan Parker. They came to Andover and founded it with a bunch of other men in the late 1640s, early 1650s. And they were able to grow their status throughout the years in the town. So Nathan married Mary Iyer. The two have 9 children together, and their youngest daughter, Sarah, is one of my main characters in my book. So when the father dies in 1685, he leaves his family pretty well off in terms of wealth and property. And then when the Salem witch trials hit in 1692, it marks the first time that Mary Parker ever got into legal trouble in her life, and when she was accused of witchcraft. And that's all I'm going to say on that, because you didn't read the book. I don't want to give any spoilers. But I will talk a little bit about Andover's role in the witch hunt. So just for reference, Andover is to the northwest of Salem. And at the time, it was the more populous community in Salem. So for those of you who don't really aren't that familiar with the witch trials, it starts in January of 1692 when some of the girls from Salem Village start behaving strangely. They start accusing people of witchcraft. And in May of 1692, the first person from Andover is accused of witchcraft. That's Martha Carrier. She already had a bad reputation in the town. People already suspected her of being a witch. So she might have been the only accused person from Andover if it hadn't been for another townwoman in Andover that felt sick. Her husband decides to call on 2 of the young girls from Salem to see if someone was bewitching her. Needless to say, more chaos ensues. So suddenly all these people in Andover are being accused of witchcraft. Now what makes Andover interesting is that if you look at a lot of people that were accused early on in Salem and the surrounding town, they were very hesitant to not only confess to witchcraft but then accuse others. In Andover, it's very much the opposite. These people are readily confessing and they're accusing other people, oftentimes their own family members. So a lot of accusations are spreading throughout family lines. Andover even acquires its own set of afflicted people. And I say people because it's not just young girls, they have adult men that are accusing people of harming them. So when all is said and done, Andover actually ends up having more people accused than either Salem Village or Salem Town combined. Which is why I find it interesting that it doesn't really get talked about much when you talk about Salem witch trials, because it did play a big role. And the people in Andover actually helped to kind of sway public opinion against the witch trials. A lot of people were writing petitions and stuff to the courts about how unfair the trials probably. So one last thing I do want to talk about with the book, it's kind of personal to me. That is I added to feel mental illness this time around when I wrote it, because when I got laid off from my job in 2019, I was actually suffering from depression, was, you know, the bad job experience combined with a lot of other things after I got out of college stuff just really took a toll on my self-esteem and my mental state. So I got to the point where I was like crying all the time, just feeling tired, you know, just didn't want to do anything, constantly feeling hopeless, and I had to go into therapy. I'm doing better now, but out of that dark chapter in my life did come this book. And I want to add mental illness into it because I want to be able to help other people who are going through it, but also for people that haven't gone through it to understand it better. Because, you know, as a society, we do have a lot of work to do with stigmatizing mental illness. So because I added that in, I of course had to research what mental health would look like in the colonial period. So what I just find that was interesting is in the 17th century, the Puritans were actually much more tolerant of the mentally ill than later generations. So by the 1600s, they did understand that the brain controlled like bodily functions and certain emotions and things like that. And they did characterize like mental health like as separate from learning disabilities, which were separate from other neurological issues like strokes and epilepsy. And when it comes to mental illness, they didn't categorize the different types like we do today. The only one they really gave the name to was melancholy, which would be more in line with depression today. And the symptoms they used was very broad. So like the typical symptoms are like tiredness, sadness, they all include that under melancholy. But then they would also include like hallucinations, which today is more in line with schizophrenia. And the causes for mental illness they saw as both being either physical or like psychological, but they, because it was a religious society, they also realized it could be spiritual. So they thought if you were like sinful or you had a lack of faith, mental illness could be like God's sort of punishment to you or like testing your conviction. And the cures for mental illness it had tended to follow based on what the cause was. So if it's physical, they might do like bloodletting on you or give you an herbal mixture to like cleanse your body of it, or they might make you do hard labor to focus your mind. And if it was spiritual, they would tell you, like fast and pray or just show repentance. But the mentally ill were cared for in their families because there were no asylums at the time or anything like that. And the community is actually pretty good about making sure they were cared for. They did pass laws to make sure that the mentally ill were being taken care of, their families couldn't do it. So they were a bit more tolerant than like what you would see in like the 1700s and stuff. They weren't just like locking people away from society. They were actually trying to help them in the community. And one last thing about the witch accusations and mental health, they weren't always necessarily correlated. Sometimes if you were mentally ill, you could be accused of being a witch, but it could also be your saving grace. There was one woman, at least, that was accused of being a witch, but when the court examined her, they found that she was just mentally ill. So they actually let her off the hook for the correct accusation. And they could also realize that if you were mentally ill, you could be hallucinating and thinking a witch is after you, when no, you're just sick. So that was what it was back then. That's all I really have to say about the history. Does anybody have any questions for me before I get to the signing?
Awesome.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Okay, so I guess we'll start with the first row. So I do have a newsletter sign up here because if you want to know more about these topics, I do have my website, GenevieveBlackwood.com. I do have blog posts up there. You guys can read more about that. So I have my newsletter here you can sign up for, so you can get like updates when I change things on my blog, or if I have like more things to do with my book. So I guess we start with the first row. Whoever wants their book signed. And while you're waiting to get your sign, please eat some food. Please eat some food. Okay.